which came in a direct line, I think, from Waterloo, perhaps by way of the Crimean War and Florence Nightingale, but nothing much had altered. And they spoke with this extraordinary accent, which suggested that they had fairly humble origins, but had been near enough the officers' mess to hear certain pronunciations, and they came out with language which was really absolutely bizarre and baroque. I thought I told you. I don't know where that comes from. I never heard it since. But it has so many grace notes in it that it is as complicated as some of the most modern atonal music. Or perhaps the Chinese would understand it better than we, because they have a four-tone language. Oh, 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 oh. And you can say the most dreadful things if you haven't got a musical ear. Yes, it was a consistently horrifying and yet comic experience. We had a sergeant major who was punch drunk and who spent all his time avoiding imaginary blows. And the nearest he could get to my name was Yitno. And when we first called into the army, we spent a horrifying first 5 or 6 weeks in billets, which was so overcrowded. There were 6 of us into the room the size of a toilet. It was really absolute agony. And afterwards we moved to rather more copious billets, although they were freezing. And I met this sergeant major in the street. And he was a man who, as a nervous tick, would say, "Stand up then. Stand up then." Even if you were lying, ready to shoot. "Stand up then." And he came up to me in the street and said, "Morning, Ustinov." "Stand up then." "There's your new billet." I said, "The new billet is much less congested, sir." He said, "I know." "More room too, isn't there?" So it was always full of that kind of thing. We had a sergeant, aged 28, who had not a tooth in his head, and they put him folded out like that. And the new teeth had been ordered from the Army Dental Corps in 1937, I think, and they had not yet arrived. I mention this for a very definite purpose, because he was a terrible man, and he watched you writing home, and he watched parcels arrive, and used to come in and say, "Any cake?" And you'd say, "No." Once you got wise to this, you said, "No, I got some toffee." And to show that it's always difficult in life to know which are the good moments and which are the bad, because until you make a final assessment, and there's probably no time for that at the end, you really don't know which is which. But he got his teeth in 1942. And the first day he went out on parade, he said, "Squad, ha!" and collapsed onto the ground, bleeding from his mouth, because he'd bitten right through his tongue. So there was a man who was better without his teeth. Dennis.
Peter, you were born in England and started your career in England. I'd love to know how it was that you crossed the Great Divide, jumped over the herring pond, and landed your first Hollywood job.
The first Hollywood job was not done there. It was done in Rome. And it was Quo Vadis, which was then going to be directed by John Huston. And they thought I looked rather corrupt and shifty, and therefore might be good for Nero. And I did a test with John Huston. But that was a period when acting was completely different to what it is today. It was a time when I'd just appeared not so long before in a film called One of Our Aircraft is Missing, in which Hugh Williams appeared, a very distinguished actor and a father of someone who's here tonight. And he kept watching me the whole time. Every time I rehearsed, I saw him watching me, and he had a face which one could see him watching, so there was no doubt about what he was doing. He wasn't just being himself, his part. And eventually he came up to me and said, "Excuse me, young man, what are you going to do in this scene?" And I was terribly shy and said, "Well, really, Mr. Williams, I thought I'd do nothing." He said, "Oh, no, you don't. I'm doing nothing." And that was a period when all drama students, I remember them, said, "I've heard how wonderfully Gerald du Maurier offered a cigarette." And everybody tried to emulate this negligent gesture. Cigarette. As though nothing had happened, and yet everything had happened, because everything was reduced to such a level, the cigarette became tremendously important. Well, I was brought up in that tradition. And here I was, being Nero, going absolutely mad, and thinking I was going so far overboard, nobody in his senses would engage me, especially not if they'd seen Gerald du Maurier offer a cigarette. And all the time, John Huston, who's this wonderful, mischievous fellow, kept saying, "A little more, Peter, just a little more." Quite mad. Can't be mad. Way overboard. And they said they liked it. But they said there was a delay of over a year, and they said that they wanted me to play the part. It was now Mervyn LeRoy who was directing it. They wanted me to play the part, but they thought I might be a little young for the role. I said that Nero died at the age of 31. If they waited any longer, I would be too old. They sent me a cable which I still got and cherish, which says, "Historical research has proved you correct." I think that was because they'd always seen Charles Laughton in the role, who was much older in outward appearance, although he wasn't at all old. But I think maybe he should have done it. Jackie Stewart?
Peter, it's a long time since you did the Grand Prix of Gibraltar as a long player. Perhaps you might tell us how it came about and maybe reminisce a little of some of the voices and why you did it.
Well, I did it because at the time I was very interested in motor racing. Since you left, I'm less interested. So I think it's a very good reason you left. I approve of that heartily because it's good to see you there. And you've now become a very good commentator. I teased you about this before, but I can't resist making it public. Quite apart from the record, which is out of date because it's a long time ago. But Jackie, I've heard commentating on motor car races in America or Canada, and he does a wonderful job, except that occasionally you hear him say, "I don't like the sound of that engine." And then he says, "And one thing to notice about this very difficult around the houses racing that they're doing here is that you've got to keep off the pavement as much as possible." Here's young Forsyth coming round again. He happens to be in the lead, but I don't think he'll hold it for long. He's gone up on the sidewalk again. The back axle's not going to take this kind of treatment much longer. I can tell you that. He'll be retired before long. There's Forsyth again. He's strangely enough still in the lead. And then right at the end, you hear a rather crestfallen Jackie saying, "Well, young Forsyth won his first Grand Prix, but I think he must account himself a very lucky young man."
Yes. You have a piano on stage. Does that mean that we're going to hear you sing and play?
No, we have a... Not for a minute, but we have a... I have an old friend sitting in the audience called Tony Hopkins, not the one who's playing Lear tonight, the composer, and he wrote the music for 2 or 3 films I did and many others. And we used to have fun improvising in the style of various composers. And we thought we'd do it tonight, really very